In the previous lesson, we learned about the world as an automatic machine metaphor. This is the scientific worldview. We learned that the laws of nature produce new and more complex things in the universe over time, and there was no intelligence required. So from the Big Bang 13.8 billion years ago to early hydrogen and helium atoms, from clouds of hydrogen gas to galaxies and stars, from stellar fusion and supernova to heavier elements, from heavy elements to rocky planets, and from rocky planets to life, all of these things emerged over time from simpler things that existed before. There has been a cosmic evolution that preceded the evolution of life on Earth. In this lesson, we'll continue to investigate the world as an automatic machine metaphor, but we'll focus on the biological world. Darwin's famous book on the origin of species by means of natural selection fits with this, the spirit of this metaphor. The world is an automatic machine. Now, Darwin, in his book, is going to make one long argument against the special creation hypothesis. This is the Christian worldview that God had created species at some time in the past, and they have remained unchanged since. Darwin gathers a mass of observations to argue that species are not fixed, that they can change. So the origin of species, then, is not to be found in God's intelligence, but Darwin's going to say there's a natural process that accounts for the origin of species and how they become so well adapted to their environment. He calls this process natural selection. You'll recall the example of the praying mantis and the spikes on its forelimbs. The Christian thinkers argued that the spikes were designed for a purpose and then constructed by God. Mantises always had these spikes on their forelimbs. Darwin is going to suggest an alternative possibility. He proposes that the ancestors of mantises did not have spikes on their forelimbs, but reproduction experiments with animal parts in the offspring. Now, Darwin wasn't sure how that happened, but he witnessed it. He could see this in nature, wherever he looked, that parents, when they have offspring, the offspring sometimes have new traits. And so here we have a forelimb with the spikes. We can think of this as a new experiment. So here's Darwin's proposal in 2 steps. Reproduction makes new animal parts randomly. These are experiments. There's no foresight. There's no intelligence involved. Step 2, animals with parts that serve a purpose survive better, and the useful part gets passed on. Notice then, Darwin is reversing the sequence. The part comes first, according to Darwin, and then the purpose, in a sense, is achieved secondarily. So in Darwin's view, purpose enters the world with no intelligent guidance. Remember, reproduction experiments with animal parts. These spikes might have been of no use whatsoever. So there's no design, there's no intelligence or designing or planning of what the offspring are going to look like. And again, Darwin didn't understand about DNA, but we now know that DNA is the recipe for the construction of an organism. And so we're going to be learning that there are random mutations in DNA which generate this kind of variation. Oftentimes the new parts don't work, but sometimes they work even better. And that's when we then see the emergence of a part with a purpose. So again, the animal parts that serve a purpose survive better. So the purpose, in a sense, is achieved or is assigned to the part only after the animal has demonstrated that it is a useful part and has succeeded in virtue of having that part. Now, animals have to get along with whatever traits they're born with. Darwin called these experiments variations, and the fact that reproduction produced variations meant that species had the potential for change. You'll recall that in the Christian worldview, captured by the metaphor the world as an artifact, species are stone sculptures, made by God and unchanging. For Darwin, species were clay sculptures, potentially changed by natural processes. Darwin did not know about DNA, but he didn't have to. He understood the variations in animal traits meant that the instructions to make animals was somehow changeable. If some natural process interacted with that variation in a systematic way, species could change. The idea that nature had the power to sculpt was evident in many geological formations around the world. Here we see a river that has carved out a canyon in Iceland. Geological forces have sculpted Delicate Arch in Arches National Park, and Bryce Canyon in Utah, and Monument Valley. Antelope Canyon is a slot canyon in Arizona, water carving these beautiful walls. Here's another slot canyon called Spooky Slot Canyon in Grand Staircase Escalante, Utah. And glaciers, as they move forward and recede, they transform their landscape. So let's return to the biological world. Here we have a stick insect. And notice its body shape. It has a thin, stick-like body shape. We'll call that's the part. And that body shape provides excellent camouflage because this insect lives amidst a bunch of sticks. So the camouflage is an adaptation. The body shape is an adaptation to avoid predators. So the purpose then of that thin body is to avoid predators. So we have the part, the thin body, and the purpose, camouflage. So what natural forces could have sculpted this species? Darwin's arguing that this trait, this thin body, was not always found in this species. The ancestors perhaps did not look like sticks. And we can see this in this diagram. So Darwin's proposing that the ancestral species looked like this, and a natural process sculpted the species until it looks like these stick insects today. Now we're going to just give a brief overview of Darwin's idea about this natural process, but we'll dig deeper into the process later in the course. So Darwin was well aware that there is always a struggle for existence among individuals of any species. More individuals are born than can possibly survive. Here we have the parent insect having offspring, and not all of these offspring are going to be able to survive, and we're going to call that a struggle for existence. So who will win the struggle? Darwin argued that nature experiments through reproduction, as we've just seen. Biological reproduction produces offspring that inherit many parental traits but also have some new traits. Notice some of the offspring are just like the parent, but other offspring have differences in body shape. Variation in body shape might make a difference to survival if the environment had many sticks against which to be camouflaged. So we have to remember we're in an environment with sticks, so presumably a thinner body would have an advantage. Against the background of massive death, Darwin realized that individuals with favorable traits would preferentially survive and pass on their fit traits. Predators eat the insects that they see. Differences in camouflage make a difference to survival. So the idea is that it's predators in the environment that are in a sense selecting some individuals to die by predation and others to survive because they escaped the predators. That's a natural interaction between two species, predator and prey. And so we have the winner then. The survivors reproduce and pass on their better camouflage. Now imagine this happening over thousands of generations, and Darwin says what you're going to have then is a species that originally did not look like sticks, changing over time, being sculpted by this interaction between predator and the the insects, until over time the insects are going to be looking more and more like sticks as an adaptation of camouflage to avoid predation. In this picture we see a leaf insect, another amazing example of the evolution of camouflage. Now species look designed, to be sure, but species look designed because we only see the result of a historical and natural process, says Darwin. What we don't see are all of nature's failed experiments that lost the struggle for existence. Those failed experiments are the food that keeps the predators alive to continue their selection, which causes the insects to evolve better and better camouflage. For Darwin, then, a natural process is responsible for creating parts with purpose. In other words, a natural process produces the appearance of design, but without an intelligent mind. You see, the Christians would say, well, yes, here's the appearance of design, and they would say this insect appears to be designed because it was designed by God. Darwin is arguing that a natural process produces insects that look like they were designed, but there was no intelligence involved in the process. Let's return to the Prometheus picture. Here we have the god Prometheus carving a human in the likeness of Prometheus. And now we're going to recognize that the material here really is clay. So you see, what Darwin's going to argue is that it was not God that sculpted species in the past. Rather, it was nature that sculpted species in the past and continues to do so now. So Darwin embraces the idea that species are clay sculptures, able to be shaped by natural forces in their environment. Just as the laws of nature created new and more complex things up to the formation of the Earth, the evolution of life on Earth followed the same pattern. A natural process caused living things to evolve into new and more complex organisms in the span of 4 billion years. Darwin didn't have much to say about the origin of life on Earth. He surmised that it occurred in some warm little pond somewhere. But today, scientists hypothesize that life emerged from geochemistry. That is, chemistry on the early Earth produced important molecules that later self-assembled into the first living cells. So here again we see this pattern of new and more complex things arising from the natural laws, in this case the laws of chemistry. So we begin with a lifeless planet Earth 4.5 billion years ago, and with a couple 100 million years of some interesting chemistry, we get the first living cells. These cells have the capacity for reproduction and so evolution. And in 4 billion years then we have the multiplication of species until today we have millions of species colonizing Earth. And so it is then that our planet Earth really is one strange rock. It is a rock that 4 billion years ago produced a living thing. And that living thing, those early cells, evolved into all of the living things that we see on Earth today. So it's interesting to contrast the scientific worldview with the Christian worldview again. Recall that in the Christian view, living things were in a sense put into this universe by God. By contrast, in the scientific worldview, living things grew out of this universe through these natural processes. So this worldview, this scientific worldview, this world is a machine metaphor has profound implications. It's all natural, no God necessary. Parts with purpose arise in a non-intelligent way. In addition, somewhat troubling to religious thinkers, there's no meaning or purpose to a human life. Evolution does not have a goal. It's just shaping species to be better adapted to their local environments. Death is a consequence of the struggle for existence. Death is not the result of human sin. Rather, the price of purpose in the biological world is massive death. There is massive death, but that is related to the emergence of purposeful parts, as we saw in the evolution of the stick insects. And finally, we are just another kind of animal, although a very special and powerful animal. Darwin argues that humans are just one of the millions of species that have been produced by this natural process. And so, like all other traits of creatures out there in nature, our most unique qualities, whether it's our intelligence or language or our capacity for moral behavior, all of these things also had an evolutionary history. So we really do live on one strange rock. It is a planet, a rocky planet that started out with no life, but then life emerged. And then, as Darwin argues, a natural process caused the evolution of millions of different kinds of living things. So we see then the automatic machine metaphor in its full glory here. We have the origin of the universe, natural laws creating new and more complicated things. We get planets, and on one of those planets at least, life took hold and evolved into the countless beautiful species we see today.